Before you can hear me, please go ahead and take your seats as Lacey and Rick give us our prelude. Thank you very much. Before I get to my official stuff here, it is just so pleasant. Every time I start up here, I start recognizing all the people who are terribly important in just making the service work, let alone the workings of the entire church. It's amazing, and I just really like everybody's cooperation. My name is Jan Vanderhoof, and I'm today's worship service leader. Our minister, Patty Willis, has this month off. As we begin, please turn off electronic devices. I invite you to enjoy the chapel there in the back of the sanctuary and note joys and concerns in the book there. If you have little ones, we have a nursery downstairs. And after our service, I invite you all downstairs to enjoy hospitality and to greet one another. This is one of the important parts of the value of this church, is the interactions of people. Finally, please note the announcements in your orders of service with many ways to be engaged in this vibrant community. I'd also like to make a few corrections in the order of service today. Oh yes, after the story for all ages, we will sing the children down. We do have a children's event. That was my mistake of not putting that in here. And Patty is not here, but she still is the minister. And neither is Mary Lou, and she still is the music director. Come, come, whoever you are. You are welcome here. No matter your age, your size, the color of your eyes, your hair, your skin, you are welcome here. No matter whom you love, how you speak, or whatever your abilities, you are welcome here. You're welcome here whether you come with laughter in your heart or tears. You are welcome here. Not just your willing hands, your loving heart, or your open mind, but you, the complete you, exactly as you are. You are welcome here. The word of the month for July is journey. That's what it is. And the seasons of love. How better to start off our journey for the month? We will, if you come for these weeks, these coming weeks, we will hear about pagan journeys, Buddhist, Christian, and life journeys. We are pleased to present today Stephen Carter and his Mormon/Unitarian Universalist journey. I am personally involved in Mormon culture because all my immediate relatives are true believing Mormons. From them, I often hear the word, quote, the gospel is true, unquote, when other members around them behave poorly. By gospel, they mean the doctrines or creeds they believe in. On the other hand, when I behave poorly, I don't have a creedal truth to fall back on. We are a covenantal rather than a creedal church. So I must ask forgiveness from others and try to keep my covenant again from then on. It also means that from the pulpit we want words spoken personally and sincerely. I can guarantee that from Stephen today. But we have no required beliefs or creeds. Instead, using our 7 principles to guide us, members covenant with one another for mutual support. This, of course, begs the question, what makes the church holy? So, in this frame of mind, would you open your hymnals to hymn 113 and sing, Where is Our Holy Church? Please rise in body or spirit.
Thank you. Hello. My name is Lowell Stewart, and I am really happy to be able to share with you a few words today about why I'm here. And appropriate that the word of the month is journey. Share a little bit of my journey to you. I was born on the East Coast in upstate New York, and then gradually moved westward through my life. I started out my career as a graphic designer and moved into first computer programming and then product management. I've journeyed in a number of ways, but none more so than in my faith. I remember as a child in my religion of origin, hearing about, first learning about faith, and asking what is that, trying to understand what faith was, and had it explained to me in terms of belief. And I thought, well, what is belief? I don't know what that really means. I mean, if something's true, it's true, right? And what does it matter if I believe it or if someone else believes it? It's still true or not? I was always a little bit confused about belief versus knowledge and things like that. But as I got older, I realized that, my religion of origin helped me understand that what I believe is not nearly so important as the action that inspires me, what it teaches me to do with my life. I had a number of experiences growing up in that religion. One when I was serving as a missionary. I remember a man very clearly that I was talking to about religion for several months, and he was so sincere. He was such a sincere seeker of truth. He was really, I found him a great example to me. And we were missionaries. We were there to sort of teach him, and I feel like I learned so much from him. But in one experience, we were praying together about what he would do and the choices that he was going to make in his life, and he was so sincere. And he told us afterwards that he had decided to follow a different faith tradition, and we had this great spiritual experience together, and I remember thinking, good for you. I was so impressed with his sincerity, and I felt that he was doing the right thing. And that, of course, set me up for a great conflict in my own mind, like, what am I doing? Am I following the right path? That was one of the seeds that was planted in my heart. Years and years later, to cut a long story short, when my wife, for her own reasons and on her own spiritual journey, came to this congregation and just sort of tentatively asked me sometime if I would like to come along with her one time. So I came and I read the program, I read about the set of principles, and I read about all the things that define this congregation. I thought a couple of things. For one thing, I thought, how can such an abstract belief system actually be effective in helping people change their lives and be effective in being the people that we need to be? And the second thought that I had was, where have you been all my life? Because I felt like this is the church that I've believed my whole life and just never knew existed. And I'm so grateful, both for my religion of origin and the many things that it taught, the lessons that it taught me, and for this congregation that I've come to recognize as my spiritual home. And thank you all for letting me share.
And the young at heart, thank you.
Hello. Today's story is a poem. It's called The Centaur. It's by my aunt. It's okay. It's all right. The reason I chose it is because you guys know what a centaur is. Of course you know what a centaur is. You're from Harry Potter land. You probably ride one. A centaur is like half horse, half human, right? There's a bit of absence. Sometimes I feel that way. I sometimes call myself a unimorph. Because I'm half Unitarian, half Mormon. So that's why I brought this. The Centaur. All right. Can you guys see? Okay. I'm just making sure. The summer that I was 10. Can it be that there was only one summer that I was 10? It must have been a long one then. Each day, I'd go out to choose a fresh horse from my stable. Which was a willow grove down by the old canal. I go down on my 2 bare feet. But when with my brother's jackknife I had cut a long limber horse with a good thick knob for a head, and peeled him slick and clean, except for a few leaves at the tail, and clipped and cinched my brother's belt around his head for a rein, I'd straddle and canter him fast up the grass-banked path, trot along in the lovely dust that talcumed over his hooves, hiding my toes and turning his feet into swift half-moons. The willow knob with the strap jouncing between my thighs was the pommel, and yet the pole of my pony's nickering head. Hey guys, you gotta keep an eye on this now. Something's gonna happen. And my head and my neck were mine, yet they were strapped like a horse. My hair flopped to the side, like the mane of a horse in the wind. My forelocks swung in my eyes, my neck arched and I snorted. I shied and skittered and reared, stopped and raised my knees, pawed at the ground and quivered, my teeth bared as we wheeled. And swished through the dust again. I was the horse and the rider, and the leather that slapped into his rump. Spanked my own behind. Doubled, my 2 hooves beat a gallop along the bank. The wind twanged in my mane, my mouth squared to the bit. And yet, I sat on my steed, quiet, negligent riding, my toes standing in the stirrups, my thighs hugging his ribs. At a walk, we drew up to the porch. I tethered into a paling, dismounting, I smoothed my skirt and entered the dusty hall. My feet on the linoleum left ghostly toes in the hall. Where have you been? Said my mother. Been riding, I slid from the sink and filled me a glass of water. What's that in your pocket? She said. Just my knife. It weighted my pocket and stretched my dress awry. Go tie back your hair, said mother. And why is your mouth all green? Rod Roy, he pulled some clover as we crossed the field, I told her. Do you guys get into your horsing that much? I don't think I ever actually ate. All right, you guys go have fun. Let us adults stay up here and be boring for a while.
For today's meditation, it helps to understand that the flower we will be speaking of can be considered a metaphor for your own spiritual journey. However way it has gone in the past and however way it's going in the future. The meditation is Fragile and Rooted by Carolyn S. Owen Coward. See a blossom in your mind's eye. Allow it to fill the interior of your imagination. Greater perfection of form in nature cannot be imagined. With inward gaze, absorb each wondrous fruited petal. Slide down its humid surface until you drop as the dew into its velvety core. Immerse your senses in this safe chamber. Such fragile beauty gives impulse to slowly reverse the journey. As you ascend the shaft towards wider light, turn your imagination around and around to see its many facets. Stored within is the memory of all flowers. Marvel that this creation, while utterly fragile, yet undaunted, boldly buds forth, turning resolutely toward the sun. We too shimmer with expectation, exuding our own illumination, color, pulse, and scent. Vulnerable still, we venture our lives courageously toward hope and light, at once fragile and real.
Now remember the other mistake in the order of service. Our July-August offering split is not with the canyons, but is with the Crossroads Urban Center Emergency Food Pantry. The Crossroads Urban Center Emergency Food Pantry. Crossroads is a local grassroots organization that serves and advocates for Utahns with low incomes, those with disabilities, and people of color to meet basic survival needs and improve their quality of life. Our offering donations will help Crossroads open their second emergency food pantry this fall in the Poplar Grove neighborhood, where there is currently a food desert. Will you please say the offering words with me? We are this church. We are its hands, its heart, its voice. Together we share the wealth of this community and sustain it with our gifts.
And if you will repeat the italicized words. From the fragmented world of our everyday lives, we gather together in search of wholeness. By many cares and preoccupations, by diverse and selfish aims, are we separated from one another and divided within ourselves. Yet we know that no branch is utterly severed from the tree of life that sustains us all. We cherish our oneness with those around us and countless generations that have gone before us. We would hold fast to all the good we inherit as we would leave behind us the outworn and the false. We would escape from bondage to the ideas of our own faith and from the delusions of our own fancy. Let us labor in hope for the dawning of a new day without hatred, violence, and injustice. Let us nurture the growth in our own lives of the love that has shone in the lives of the greatest of men and women, the rays whose lamps still illumine our way. In this spirit we gather. In this spirit we pray.
One of my daughter's fiances says, "This is what you came for." I'm actually leaving for Las Vegas right after this, not to go join the world, but to go watch dance competitions. It's going to be fun. I appreciate the altar. It's interesting to me because it looks as if water is running down from the Unitarian spheres down into the Mormon spheres. And in a lot of ways, that's kind of been how Unitarianism has been working for me. It's been informing my Mormonism, giving it life. And today, I'm going to return the favor and see if I can't bring a little Mormonism to enrich Unitarian, our congregation here. So when I talked to Jan about this sermon last week, I asked him what kind of spiritual journey he wanted me to speak about. I said, do you want me to tell my own, or do you want the archetypal Mormon spiritual journey? Tell your own story, he said. People love that. And immediately, red warning lights started going off in my head. It's a trap, I thought. So you're probably wondering what I actually mean by that. It was the word that Jan used. Story. For most people, story is an innocuous word, but I spent my graduate career studying stories. How they're constructed, how they function, how they mutate, how they shape our lives. And I'm here to tell you, I don't trust them one bit. It all started, I feel a story coming on. It all started during my first months in graduate school. I was in a creative writing MFA program, and I found out that despite the fact that I moved far away from Utah specifically to get some breathing room for Mormonism, I couldn't write about anything else. But writing about Mormonism was difficult. it seemed like there were these two forces that were constantly battling for control of the way that I described my life. One of them was the ain't Mormon great force, and the other one was the ain't Mormon awful force. It was as if I had been traveling down one river and suddenly found that it had split into two. So as I tried to write, I would bounce back and forth between these two currents, noticing how each one directed the events that I was relating, trying to feel if one of them resonated more with my life than the other. In other words, I started to discover that my story wasn't actually my story. Though I was writing my own life, my direction seemed to be dictated by an outside force. I wasn't telling my own story. The story was trying to tell me. Cue the Twilight Zone music. It sounds goofy, I know. After all, aren't we the ones who write or say the words of a story? Aren't we its originators? But the more I tried to write, the more I believed that something out there was alive. Then I came across this passage that's become a kind of scripture to me. It's from a book called Witches Abroad by fantasy author Terry Pratchett, second only to J.K. Rowling. Quote, people think that stories are shaped by people. In fact, it's the other way around. Stories exist independently of their players. Stories, great flapping ribbons of shaped space-time, have been blowing and uncoiling around the universe since the beginning of time. Stories etch grooves, deep enough for people to follow in the same way that water follows certain paths down a mountainside. And every time fresh actors tread the path of the story, the grooves run deeper. So 1,000 heroes have stolen fire from the gods. 1,000 wolves have eaten grandmother. 1,000 princesses have been kissed. And millions of unknown actors have moved unknowing through the pathways of story. Stories don't care who takes part of them. All that matters is that the story gets told, that the story repeats. In other words, that's the end of the quote. And listen to me. In other words, if you look at them in the right light, stories are huge parasitic beings that feed on volunteers who want nothing more than to take an extended journey through the story's digestive tract. Now this approach sounds pretty pessimistic, I admit, especially since a lot of studies have shown that having a strong narrative to guide one's life actually promotes emotional and mental health. For example, I read a story from a poem from my great aunt, and it was her and a few other people who sort of motivated me to study writing myself. If I would have had it there, I probably would have pursued that path. When you have stories of ancestors to model your own life on, you tend to be more resilient. You tend to have more faith in your ability to overcome obstacles. You tend to work harder because someone in your direct gene line succeeded, and therefore, you should be able to succeed as well. However, we're talking about spiritual journeys here. And to me, the telling of a spiritual journey is completely different than telling any other kind of story. Let me use a story to approach that difference. In the 2013 Polish film Ida, the title character, a Noviet nun on the cusp of taking her vows, is sent by her mother superior to make contact with the only living relative they know of. Along the way, Ida finds out that she's Jewish. And she came very close to being killed as a child during World War II. She also meets a saxophone player who initiates her into the realm of sexual pleasure. As the pair lounge on the bed the next morning, the saxophone player asks Ida if she'd like to come on tour with his band. She considers it a moment, and finally asks, "And then what?" "Oh, I suppose we'll get an apartment together," he says vaguely. "And then what?" she replies. "Get married, I guess. And then what? Children, I suppose. A job, life." She considers his answers until the scene cuts to her walking down the road carrying her suitcase, headed back to the convent. This scene has stuck with me for a long time, mostly because of the profound wisdom Ida displays in asking her single, persistent question. And then what? I like to call that question Ida's pickaxe, because what she was doing was knocking little escape tunnels into a story that was trying to swallow her. It was an enticing story, including a handsome young man who toured the country, jazzy music, and partaking in the pleasures of secular life. Now, I want to apply Ida's pickaxe to what I might have presented today had I taken Jan's very good advice and simply told you the story of my spiritual journey. I would probably start with my very orthodox upbringing as a Utah County Mormon. I talk about my 2-year stint proselytizing in Toronto, and then I'd probably move on to my temple marriage and college career, where I first started to encounter ideas that didn't fit with the Orthodox Mormon worldview. And then I head into my graduate career in Alaska, where I underwent a years-long faith crisis that has not yet ended. And then I talk about my years as the editor of Sunstone, which is an independent Mormon magazine. And then I probably end up with how I've taken up meditation over the past few years and why I've been hanging out with the likes of you. Has a happy ending, right? So much of that is a story that I've told many times, in both speech and writing, to the point where I'm starting to notice that it's taking on a life of its own, just as Terry Pratchett predicted it would. In fact, as soon as Jan made his suggestion, I felt the story wake up and say, yeah, let's tell me. And that's when I knew it was time to take out Ida's pickaxe. Essentially, what has happened is that I found myself right back where I was at the beginning of graduate school, realizing that a potent force is ready and eager to pluck up the events of my life and forge them into its own image. The only difference is, this time, it's a force I made myself. In graduate school, I could blame those stories that were trying to tell me on outside forces. But as I struggled to write this sermon, I realized now that I had no one to blame but myself. It's my own story trying to take over. It's a bittersweet realization. On the one hand, it was very good for me to hack my own story out of that wilderness. It gave me experience and wisdom that I wouldn't have gained otherwise. But now, I have to abandon it. It's not a plant anymore. It's not a flower that we were talking about, growing and interacting with the environment. It's a museum display now, curated, interpreted, and entombed. It's time for me to revise the telling of my spiritual journey. So, I take out Ida's pickaxe and take a swing. And then what? Of course, I can't see the future, though I know the vague outlines of how a story like mine tends to go. Watch my children become adults, perhaps become a grandparent, retire, die. Almost makes me want to run off and join a monastery. But that's the story of my life journey. I'm here to talk about the story of my spiritual journey. As I consider how to approach such a story, I wonder if I should draw from the great spiritual journey classics, like John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, Dante's Divine Comedy, or maybe even, we've got it right up here, the story of Lehi's dream. In the Book of Mormon, where Lehi watches as masses of people try to find their way through a dark, dreary waste, covered with mists of darkness and strange roads, in search of a tree that has sweet white fruit. But the only way to get to that tree is to cling to a rod of iron. But even if they do make it, even if they do partake of the fruit, they can still be led into forbidden paths by people tempting them from a great and spacious building. So the common element among each of these stories is the idea of progression toward a goal. The celestial gates, Paradiso, the tree of life. In these stories, the spiritual journey is a path fraught with obstacles, misdirections, and temptations. Indeed, we've talked already today about the spiritual journey as if it were a path, whether it's that we've left one, discovered a new one, or that it has taken us somewhere unexpected. In other words, we often talk about a spiritual journey as if it were linear, as if it led to a goal. This, of course, is what makes the story satisfying. Its point. You're probably wondering if I have one. I do. The end value that makes sense of its beginning and middle. That's why when someone you meet at a party rambles on and on, you finally have to say, what's your point? Because you want to know how the events resolve. But as I've been saying, I think the story of a spiritual journey is essentially different from any other kind of story. The stories we've been talking about so far have been linear. They focus on a character and follow him or her through a series of events that lead toward a particular ending. These stories ask, what does it mean? But the story of a spiritual journey asks, what is beyond meaning? This is because the story of a spiritual journey is the story of someone who was wielding Eda's pickaxe, relentlessly hacking away at every ending, every meaning presented to them, until they finally see that there really is actually only one ending to a life story. No matter how many goals we accomplish, no matter how many epiphanies we have, no matter how much we change the world, we get exactly the same ending every other organism does. A return to the earth. At which point, meaning, that shining bauble that every story promises us, winks out. The body has ceased to move. The mind has ceased to function. The heart has ceased to beat. And though the people who knew us will spin meaning from our life and from our death, they'll do so primarily to maintain their own sense of meaning, which will wink out at the end of at their own death. You see, meaning inevitably abandons its steed as it falls, hopping from life to life as each expires. Shall I end there? All right, I'll keep going. This is probably why so many religions take pains to construct an afterlife. It extends the story, and thus the possibility of meaning. What's interesting is how few of these religions really have much to say about how the next life goes. Most of the time it's described as a cushy musical existence, spent in houses larger than the ones we live in now. In Mormonism, it's a little different, since it's explicit that we continue to progress in the next life until we become like God. But when pressed, what we're usually told is that the afterlife will be a lot like what's going on now, except with crystal planets. Do you know about that part? She tells, yeah, crystal planets, it's really cool. So even if we believe that death is not the end of meaning, and that our spirits live on, we have little to offer but a soft-focused vision of the same old grind we have here in mortality. In other words, the idea of an afterlife mostly functions as a reason to lay down Eda's pickaxe, because we're too terrified to consider an ending, not just to ourselves, but to meaning. Our relationship with stories, as it turns out, is a symbiotic one. They may be feeding on our lives, but we can't live without their meaning. As a low-stake example, consider how disoriented or even lost you feel at the end of a television series or book series. This is where fan fiction comes from, our overwhelming desire to stay inside the story. So it's even more so when we think about our life story. This is why I say that the story of the spiritual journey has to be one that is beyond meaning. But how do you tell such a story? Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, gave an enticing hint in his King Follett discourse. Quote, "I take my ring from my finger and liken it unto the mind of man, the immortal spirit, because it has no beginning. Suppose I cut it in two. As the Lord lives, because it has a beginning, it would have an end." This suggests that the story of the spiritual journey is not linear, but circular. But of course, what does that mean? The first thing that comes to my mind is Winnie the Pooh and Piglet tracking a heffalump in circles around a small grove in the snow, getting more and more terrified as the heffalump tracks seem to multiply. Or perhaps one of those songs designed to keep kids entertained during long car trips and drive their parents insane. Or perhaps Former Mormons are going to like this part. The relentless recycling of sermons at a Mormon general conference. The only thing that seems to change is the speaker's tie. Does this mean that the story of the spiritual journey is just a zero? An endless loop? Being tied forever to your seat? That it's a small world after all ride at Disneyland? For all our sakes, I hope not. Fortunately, the poet T.S. Eliot has another hint for us. We shall not cease for exploration. And the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. So along the course of our circuit, we obtain an enlargement of understanding. We perceive more clearly. We connect better with our surroundings. Not only are we more present, there seems to be more of us to be present. So does the spiritual journey depict a character as if he or she is a kind of planet orbiting the sun, at various points becoming wiser and more aware? I'll admit that still feels like it has the same structure as the linear story that I've been trying to teach you to be so suspicious of. The character is still a single point on the path. I suppose we can call the path eternal because it's circular, but that seems like cheating, like saying that manicotti is an eternal meal. Fortunately, Stephen Mitchell comes to our rescue. In his novel, Meeting with the Archangel, the main character gets high on broccoli, as we all do in our weaker moments, and has a kind of experiential vision where he has to stretch himself wider and wider until he's able to let even the most heinous of people and events pass through him. This means not that he's been able to rid himself of these people and events, but that he now encompasses them. He has become large enough to hold them. It's kind of a retelling of Jesus' atonement in the Garden of Gethsemane, except instead of paying the price for humanity's sins, which is how the Christian tradition usually interprets the story, Jesus is becoming, as the atonement would suggest, at one with everyone and everything, erasing the boundary between him and the rest of the universe. So with this circular version of the spiritual journey, you're not a character on a path, whether a path is up a mountain or a path is around the sun. Rather, you are the orbit. And that orbit becomes larger as you gain experience, allowing you to encompass more, to erase the distinction between you and others, to become more at one. But learning how to tell a new story is a difficult thing. I have a hard time just learning how to tell a story. You know how people say, oh, you're so good at stories, you must be naturally good? I went to school to learn how to tell stories because I was a terrible storyteller. Thank goodness my tuition paid off. Or did it? I still see most of your eyes open. I think I'm doing okay. So, the linear, goal-oriented story is deeply ingrained in us. So how might we start telling circular, expansive stories rather than linear stories? I have a few ideas. None of them very fleshed out at the moment because this is actually a pretty new idea for me. So let's start here. Watch how your story casts other people. Does it tend to reinforce boundaries or erase them? For example, when I talk about my questioning of Orthodox Mormonism, does that lead me to dismiss the people who are in its center? If so, I'm being linear. I'm saying, hey, I'm further along the path to enlightenment than those people are. This perspective makes my ego happy, and it allows me to snuggle down into the moving away from Mormonism story, but that's a path with a point. And as I've been belaboring, no point can withstand this pickaxe. On the other hand, does my telling make it evident that my story encompasses the Orthodox Mormons I came from? Even if some of them have drawn their circle to exclude me, do I draw mine wider to include them, as Carolyn Pearson encourages us to do? This is difficult work, of course. Just because you've taken up the expansive story model rather than the linear story model doesn't mean that you'll be forever at peace with people around you. In fact, you'll be a mystery to them, as you won't fit any of the stories they inhabit, and you'll have to be willing to live with that. But on the other hand, people can feel it when you've drawn your Daddy says, such a feeling is good medicine. Second, tell stories about when your perspective was opened. I'm not talking about telling conversion stories when you left one camp for another, or realized how wrong a philosophy you clung to was. And this is coming from someone who went through his very own Ayn Rand phase. That's linear. That's taking you from the law of one story and delivering you into another. It's a story with an endpoint that will not withstand Edith's pickaxe. Rather, construct your stories to explore how you now encompass both camps, both philosophies. What have you drawn from each? How do they interact within you? Certainly, it's satisfying to the ego to kvetch over the stupidity of that person or that group, especially if you were once one of them. But it's also constraining. Truthfully, you're trying to get into practice for those times when life forces you to stretch in terrifying ways. So start small. Learn how to tell expansion stories. They'll be useful later on. And actually, I appreciated Lowell's approach because you were kind of like a tree. There was a smaller ring inside of you from your previous religion, and another ring that's this one. It seemed like you had it all interacting within you, which I really appreciated. Third, see what it's like to escape your story. This is a riff on a concept Eckhart Tolle presents in New Earth. Now, we've all built up a story about who we are from pieces of our childhood, education, experiences, traumas, and successes, and that story forms our identity, which means that it's invisible to us. We just assume it's correct because we made it ourselves. But since we live around other people who have their own identity stories, they will sometimes call our identity into question. Someone might tell us we're ill-informed about a subject, or that we're a social rung lower than we had thought, or not as beautiful as we had imagined, or embarrassing in some way. Our first reaction is always to defend ourselves, even if only in our minds, building a case for our worthiness, scrambling back up the ladder to where we deem as our proper rung, definitely higher than the person who just dissed us, and re-enthroning our story of ourselves. But by doing so, you're missing an opportunity. The fact is, the story you identify yourself with is just a story. It's not actually you. When you get knocked down a rung, it's a perfect chance to see outside of that story for a moment. For example, one time I started to hold forth about one of my theories, and a friend groaned, "Not that again!" I was taken aback. I felt like I was being attacked, like something essential about me would be destroyed if I didn't do something now. I wanted to jump in and say something like, "No, I've added to my theory since the last time you heard it. Listen!" But instead, I sat back and I felt what it was like to have my idea not be as awesome as I thought it was. After the first few moments of embarrassment, I actually started feeling a little bit liberated. I realized that my little theory was, in fact, just a little theory, and that I could let go of it and not be any worse off. Life is bigger than that. And that's actually turned out to be the thing that I like most about this practice. I've realized that whenever somebody knocks my story out from under me, nothing catastrophic ever actually happens. I don't fall apart. Life goes on pretty much the same way it had before. And I realized that the ending points I had invested in aren't really that important. I had been too attached to a linear story. So, with this circular, expansive version of the spiritual journey, what happens to the narrative? Well, instead of thinking of people moving at particular rates down a particular path, or millions of people taking various paths to various goals, instead, let's think of it as looking down on a pond during a rain shower. The concentric circles from each of the raindrops impact expand individually over the surface of the water. And when the circles run into each other, they don't stop. They don't fight for the space. They just keep expanding. In the same way, Various spiritual journeys aren't at odds with each other. They simply start from different places and expand from there. If a circle starts in Christianity, it doesn't have to stop when it encounters Islam or Buddhism or paganism. Neither does it have to destroy any of them in order to continue expanding. One of the things that I like most about this conception of my theory, of the spiritual journey, is what it says about the universe. The universe isn't a predefined area that we try to encompass. So what I'm preaching is not consumerism brought to a metaphysical level. Rather, as we expand, the universe expands. Our journey adds a particular texture to our little corner of the universe, which, of course, gets larger the more we expand. And we get to partake in each other's expansion as we encounter it. This is one reason why we need each other, to both partake in each other's uniqueness and to recognize and revel in our oneness. And then death, the terror of our story ending, starts to lose its sting. Even if we don't believe in an afterlife where our personality, as formed and deformed as it is by chance and circumstances, persists, we can see that our expansion continues, even when our bodies stop moving. After all, we inhale. Into our lungs comes air that walked through the Earth's atmosphere for billions of years. It had passed through numerous organisms before us. It has participated in untold chemical reactions. Now it enters our bloodstream. It oxygenates our cells. It facilitates the firing of the neurons that propel our thoughts and speech. It's an essential part of our body's life right now. We exhale, expelling air into the atmosphere that disperses into a million directions, participating again in numerous chemical processes, fueling numerous other beings. What was once essential to this body and its thought processes is now essential to a million other beings and processes. Where is the distinction between them and us? Where is the distinction between the air that facilitated the life of our body and that body? Where is the distinction between the air and the atmosphere? In one breath, we have become an inextricable part of this spinning planet, which circles inside the solar system, which forms a minuscule grain on a single arm of a galaxy that is a footnote to a speck in the universe. This breath is the breath of the universe. And when we cease to breathe, our bodies continue their reaction with the universe, just in slightly different ways. Parts of what was once us becomes parts of the rest of the planet and its processes, just like right now, at this very moment. From this point of view, an expanding circle gets further and further. Oh, I said that absolutely the wrong way. From the view of a point, an expanding circle gets further and further away until it is finally lost to sight. And perhaps that looks like death, especially to a linear worldview. But that expansion is just a continuation of the journey, one that we're all on, whether we know it or not. For me, this is the place where the Mormon circle and the Unitarian Universalism circle intersect with and enrich each other. The UU's seventh principle encourages us to dwell in respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part, an idea that is poeticized in one of Mormonism's oldest hymns, and strangest, If You Could Hide to Kolob. As a bit of background, in Mormon scripture, Kolob, actually, in a Mormon drawing in scripture, Kolob is the planet nearest to where God lives, kind of like in Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Does that help? This is how it goes. If you could hide a Kolob in the twinkling of an eye, and then continue onward with that same speed to fly, do you think that you could ever, through all eternity, find out the generation where gods began to be? Or see the grand beginning where space did not extend? Or view the last creation where gods and matter end? Methinks the Spirit whispers, no man has found pure space, nor seen the outside curtains where nothing has a place. The works of gods continue, and worlds and lives abound. Improvement and progression at one funny turn around. Get the connection? All right, I'm done. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.
Since we don't have, if you could hide a collab in our hymnal, we'll sing hymn number 318, We Would Be One. Please rise in body or spirit. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. T.S. Eliot.
I
you very much. This is the time in the service where we invite those who are visitors to